With the weight of grief still heavy on her shoulders and a mountain of debt hanging over her head, Rebecca Harlow reluctantly signed the inheritance papers for her husband's failing farm, intending only to sell it quickly and move on with her life. She had no idea that beneath the ancient oak tree standing sentinel in the far corner of the property lay secrets that would not only rewrite the forgotten history of Clearwater County, but would ignite a battle between powerful developers, passionate archaeologists, and a Native American tribe fighting to reclaim their sacred heritage. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The November wind cut through Rebecca's thin jacket as she followed real estate agent Diane Miller up the gravel driveway. Her boots crunched on fallen leaves as she took in the sight of what was now her property. 50 acres of largely uncultivated land, a weathered farmhouse badly in need of repair, and several outbuildings in various states of collapse. As I mentioned on the phone, the property has significant potential, Diane said, her voice bright with professional optimism that couldn't mask the reality before them. The location alone makes it attractive to developers. Stillwater Creek runs along the eastern boundary, and with the county expanding, this land could be quite valuable. Rebecca nodded absently, her mind elsewhere. Just 3 months ago, she had been a high school art teacher with a comfortable life, married to James Harlow, a man who had surprised everyone by abandoning his accounting career 5 years earlier to pursue his dream of sustainable farming. That dream had died with him when his truck skidded off a rain-slicked road, leaving Rebecca with nothing but memories and a property hemorrhaging money. James never mentioned how bad things had gotten, she said quietly, more to herself than to Diane. The bank statements I found after he was gone showed the farm was months away from foreclosure. Diane's professional smile faltered. Your husband was very proud. Men like that often find it difficult to admit when they're struggling. They reached the farmhouse, a 2-story structure that might have been charming under different circumstances. The white paint was peeling, the porch sagged slightly, and several shutters hung at precarious angles. Yet there was something about the place that tugged at Rebecca's artist sensibility, a certain dignified resilience in its weathered boards and wavy glass windows. The house itself is quite solid, Diane continued, unlocking the front door. Built in 1897 by the original homesteaders, the Moore family. They owned this land until your husband purchased it 6 years ago. The interior smelled of dust and abandonment. Rebecca had visited the farm only a handful of times during James's passionate farming phase, always making excuses about her teaching schedule. The truth, which now filled her with regret, was that she had never supported his agricultural dreams, viewing them as a midlife crisis that would eventually pass. Take your time looking around, Diane suggested. I have some calls to make. I'll wait in the car. Alone in what had been her husband's passion project, Rebecca moved through the rooms like a visitor in a museum of missed opportunities. The kitchen with its ancient appliances and handmade oak table. The living room where faded photographs of James stood on the mantel, his smile confident and hopeful as he posed with his first harvest. The study where farming books and journals sat gathering dust, dreams abandoned in mid-sentence. She picked up one of the journals, opening to a random page. James's handwriting, always so precise from his accounting days, filled the margins with notes about soil composition and crop rotation. The technical language was foreign to her, but the passion behind the words was unmistakable. I didn't understand, she whispered to the empty room. I'm sorry. Upstairs, she found more evidence of the life James had built without her. Clothes in the closet, a toothbrush in the bathroom, boots by the bed. He had been living here full-time for the past year, telling her it was easier than making the hour-long commute each day. Now she wondered if he had been hiding the farm's financial troubles, trying to save his dream without burdening her with worry. The real estate agent had mentioned developers being interested in the property. It would be the practical solution: sell the land, pay off the debts, use whatever remained to rebuild her life. James was gone, and no amount of sentimentality would bring him back. As Rebecca descended the stairs, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Clearwater High School, a reminder of the indefinite leave of absence she had taken after James's death. "Rebecca, it's Marion," came the familiar voice of the school principal. "I'm just checking in. The substitute is working out fine, but the kids miss you." "We all do. Thanks, Marion. I'm actually at James's farm right now, trying to figure out what to do with it." "Ah," Marion said, understanding in her voice. "And what are you thinking?" "Selling seems the only option. It's hemorrhaging money, and I don't know the first thing about farming." There was a pause. On the other end, "Well, whatever you decide, know that your job is waiting whenever you're ready to come back." After ending the call, Rebecca stepped onto the back porch. The property stretched out before her, fields that had once been productive now overgrown, an orchard with unpruned trees, a large barn in need of repairs. Beyond that, a gentle slope led down to a line of trees marking Stillwater Creek. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Something drew her attention to the far corner of the property, an enormous oak tree standing alone on a small rise. Unlike the rest of the neglected farm, the area around the tree appeared tended, the grass shorter, no weeds encroaching on its territory. Curious, Rebecca made her way across the field. As she approached the massive oak, she noticed something odd: small stone markers partially buried in the ground around its base. They were weathered and ancient-looking, arranged in a pattern that seemed deliberate rather than random. Kneeling, she brushed away leaves from one of the stones, revealing what appeared to be faint carvings on its surface. The markings were unlike anything she recognized, certainly not English letters or numbers, but clearly human-made symbols. "What were you doing out here, James?" she murmured, running her fingers over the strange markings. A gust of wind rustled the oak's remaining leaves, and Rebecca had the uncanny sensation of being watched. She looked up, half expecting to see someone observing her from the tree line, but there was only the empty landscape and the wide Nebraska sky. Returning to the house, she found Diane waiting on the porch. "Find anything interesting?" the realtor asked. Rebecca hesitated. "Actually, yes. There are some strange stone markers under that big oak tree." "Do you know anything about them?" Diane frowned slightly. "Stone markers? No, that wasn't mentioned in any of the property documentation. Probably just old boundary stones or something from the original homestead." "Maybe," Rebecca replied, though something told her they were much older than the farm itself. "Speaking of documentation," Diane continued, "I've already had inquiries about the property. Clearwater Development Group has expressed strong interest. They're looking to build a new residential community with a golf course. They'd likely offer well above market value. The prospect should have been appealing: a quick sale, financial security, freedom from the burden of James's failing dream." Yet Rebecca found herself strangely reluctant. "I need a few days before making any decisions," she said. "There are some personal items to sort through." "Of course," Diane handed her a set of keys. "Take whatever time you need. Just keep in mind that these opportunities don't always last." Clearwater Development is moving quickly on several projects in the county. After Diane left, Rebecca returned to the house and began searching through James's papers. In his study, she found folders of financial documents confirming her worst fears. The farm had been losing money steadily for the past 3 years. Loan applications, rejected grant proposals, and increasingly desperate attempts to make the operation sustainable. Among the expected paperwork, she discovered something puzzling: a folder labeled Oak Ridge History. Inside were photocopies of old newspaper articles, academic journal excerpts, and handwritten notes in James's precise script. One article from 1967 caught her attention. Construction halted after discovery of Native American artifacts. The piece described how road work near Stillwater Creek had been temporarily suspended when workers uncovered pottery fragments and stone tools, believed to be from the Pawnee tribe. The exact location wasn't specified, but a quote from the county. Historians suggested the entire area might have been a significant settlement hundreds of years earlier. Another clipping, this one from 1978, detailed a dispute between local farmers and a team of archaeologists seeking permission to excavate portions of private land along the creek. The archaeologists claimed the region contained valuable historical artifacts, but their requests were denied by property owners concerned about disruption to their operations. Most intriguing was a handwritten letter dated 1932, apparently a copy James had made from an original source. It was from Thomas Moore, presumably a descendant of the original homesteaders, to the Nebraska Historical Society. I must bring to your attention the curious stone formations on our family property. My grandfather always told us they marked sacred ground and should not be disturbed. Native people occasionally visited the site when he was a boy, though they no longer come. I believe these stones and what may lie beneath them could be of historical significance. The letter went on to request a professional assessment of the site, but Rebecca could find no record of whether this had ever occurred. As night fell, she continued reading through James's collection, pieces of the puzzle slowly coming together. It appeared that her husband had stumbled upon something significant, potentially an undocumented Native American burial ground or sacred site, and had been quietly researching its history while protecting it from discovery. A final document in the folder made her heart race. A letter from the Pawnee Nation Historical Preservation Office dated just 6 weeks before James's death. It acknowledged receipt of his initial inquiry and expressed interest in sending a representative to examine the site. There was no indication of whether this visit had ever taken place. Rebecca slept fitfully in the guest bedroom, unwilling to use the master where James had spent his final months. Her dreams were vivid and strange, the oak tree stretching impossibly high against a star-filled sky, figures moving in circular patterns around its base, voices speaking in languages she couldn't understand. She woke at dawn, the house creaking around her as an early winter storm approached. After making a pot of coffee in the ancient percolator, she bundled up and headed back to the oak tree, drawn to it with an intensity she couldn't explain. In the pale morning light, the stone markers seemed more deliberate than they had the day before. Rebecca began to notice additional features. Slight mounds in the earth surrounding the tree, small clearings where nothing grew despite the general overgrowth of the farm, patterns in the placement of the stones that suggested purpose rather than coincidence. As she knelt to examine one of the larger stones, her fingers brushed away accumulated soil to reveal more extensive carvings, spirals, zigzag lines, and what appeared to be animal forms. These weren't random markings or weathering patterns. They were created by human hands with specific intentions. "You found them, then?" The voice startled Rebecca so badly she nearly fell. Turning, she found an elderly man standing a few yards away, his weathered face creased with a mixture of curiosity and concern. He wore overalls and a heavy work coat, a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said, raising his hand slightly. "Didn't mean to frighten you. Name's Harold Jenkins. I farm the property that borders yours to the west." "Rebecca Harlow," she replied, heart still pounding. "You knew about these stones?" Harold nodded, approaching slowly. "Your husband and I talked about them often. James was determined to protect this place. That's why he kept the grass cut around here even when the rest of the farm was struggling." "What exactly is this place?" Rebecca asked. Harold looked uncomfortable. It's not really my story to tell. The local tribes would be the ones to properly explain it. But according to my grandfather, who heard it from his grandfather, this hill was sacred to the Pawnee people long before white settlers claimed this land. The oak tree is over 500 years old, and the stones. He gestured to the markers. They're boundary stones for a burial ground. The revelation sent a chill through Rebecca that had nothing to do with the November air. A burial ground? There are people buried here? Important people, from what I understand. Spiritual leaders. The oak was considered a connection between worlds. Harold's eyes scanned the area with respect. James was researching it all, connecting with tribal historians. He was determined to do right by this place, even though it complicated his farming. Operation significantly. Complicated how? Well, he couldn't plow this section, for one thing. And when Clearwater Development started buying up properties in the county last year, they offered him 3 times market value for this land. He turned them down flat once he understood what was here. This new information shifted Rebecca's understanding of her husband's financial struggles. It wasn't just that the farm was failing. He had deliberately rejected a solution that would have solved their money problems because he was protecting this site. Clearwater Development has already reached out about buying the property, she said. Harold's expression darkened. I'm not surprised. They've been systematically acquiring land throughout the county. Their CEO, Victor Montgomery, doesn't take rejection well. He was furious when James refused to sell. A gust of wind brought the first few raindrops of the approaching storm. Harold glanced at the sky. You should know something else. 2 days. Before his accident, James called me. He said he'd found something important under one of these stones, something that might change everything. He wouldn't tell me what it was over the phone, just that he needed to document it properly before going public. Rebecca stared at him. Are you suggesting his accident wasn't an accident? Harold shrugged. All I know is that James was careful, especially on these roads. And he was excited about whatever he'd found. Said it would make it impossible for developers to touch this land. The implications were staggering. Rebecca looked back at the stone markers, seeing them with new eyes, not just as archaeological curiosities but as pieces of a puzzle that might have cost her husband his life. I need to see his phone, she said suddenly. The police returned. His personal effects, but I never checked his messages or photos. Harold nodded. If you need any help, I'm just over that ridge. The Jenkinses have been neighbors to this property for 4 generations. We look out for our own. As Harold departed, the rain began falling in earnest. Rebecca hurried back to the farmhouse, her mind racing with questions. What had James discovered? Why had he kept his research secret from her? And if his discovery threatened Clearwater Development's plans, could they have been involved in his death? In the study, she found James's phone in a drawer, along with his wallet and keys, personal effects returned by the police after the accident. The phone was dead, but she found a charger in the kitchen drawer. While waiting for it to power up, she returned to the folder of research materials. Among the papers was a business card for Dr. Eliza Blackwood, Department of Anthropology and Native American Studies at the University of Nebraska. A handwritten note on the back read, Meeting. Scheduled, Tuesday, 3 p.m., with a date just 3 days after James's fatal accident. The phone finally powered on, revealing dozens of missed calls and messages from the weeks after James's death, most from people offering condolences. Rebecca scrolled back to the days before the accident, looking for anything unusual. There it was, a series of photos taken at the oak tree site. Close-ups of one particular stone marker that appeared to have been carefully lifted from its position. Beneath it was what looked like a small cavity in the earth, and inside, wrapped in what appeared to be ancient leather, was an object James had photographed from multiple angles, a stone tablet approximately 8 inches square, covered with intricate carvings. The final photo showed the tablet cleaned of dirt, its surface details clear, symbols similar to those on the standing stones, but more elaborate, organized in precise rows. James had placed a ruler beside it for scale. His last text message was to Dr. Blackwood, found tablet with extensive inscriptions. Appears to match 1750 C.E. Pawnee star chart descriptions in Hastings' collection. Can we move meeting earlier? This changes everything. Her response: this is potentially significant. Don't disturb anything further. Documentation protocol critical. Can meet tomorrow instead. James had never made it to that meeting. Rebecca's hands trembled as she set down the phone. If her husband had indeed discovered a significant Native American artifact, one that could potentially designate the property as a protected historical site, it would explain why he had rejected Clearwater Development's offer. It might also explain why someone would want to prevent him from sharing that discovery. But where was the tablet now? It wasn't among the personal effects returned after the accident. Had James hidden it somewhere on the property? Or had someone else found it first? The storm intensified outside, rain lashing against the windows as thunder rolled across the countryside. Rebecca felt suddenly vulnerable in the isolated farmhouse. If James's accident had been deliberately caused, and if it was connected to his discovery, then whoever was responsible might now see her as a threat as well. She needed to find that tablet. More importantly, she needed allies who understood the significance of what James had discovered. Returning to the phone, she found Dr. Blackwood's number and pressed call. To her relief, the professor answered on the third ring. Dr. Blackwood speaking. My name is Rebecca Harlow. I'm James Harlow's widow. I believe he was scheduled to meet with you about an archaeological discovery on our farm, but he died before that meeting could take place. There was a pause on the other end. Mrs. Harlow, yes. I was deeply sorry to hear about your husband's passing. His preliminary findings were potentially quite significant. I found his research in photos of what looks like a stone tablet. But the tablet itself is missing. I think. Rebecca hesitated, then continued. I think his discovery might be connected to his death. That's a very serious suggestion, Dr. Blackwood said, her tone cautious but not dismissive. Would it be possible for me to come see the site? Perhaps tomorrow morning? Yes, please. And there's something else you should know. A development company is pressuring me to sell the property. From what I've learned, they made my husband an offer that he refused after finding the burial ground. Clearwater Development, Dr. Blackwood said. Not a question but a statement. You know them? They've been involved in several controversies regarding historical preservation in the past few years. They tend to move very quickly once they acquire property, often before proper archaeological assessments can be conducted. There was the sound of papers shuffling. I can be there by 10 a.m. tomorrow. In the meantime, don't discuss your husband's discovery with anyone else, especially not anyone from Clearwater. After ending the call, Rebecca felt a measure of relief at having found a potential ally. But the farmhouse suddenly seemed too isolated, too vulnerable in the storm. She gathered James's research materials, his phone, and a few personal items, then locked up the house and headed to her car. As she pulled onto the main road, headlights appeared in her rearview mirror. A large vehicle following closer than comfort would dictate on the rain-slicked road. When she turned toward town, it turned as well, maintaining its distance but clearly following her path. Heart pounding, Rebecca tried to stay calm. There was only one main road from the farm to Clearwater, so it was entirely possible this was just another vehicle heading to town. But when she deliberately took a wrong turn down a side street, the vehicle followed. Rebecca accelerated, trying to put distance between herself and the pursuer. The rain made visibility poor, but she knew Clearwater well enough to navigate its streets. She made a series of quick turns, finally pulling into the well-lit parking lot of the sheriff's department. The pursuing vehicle, which she could now see was a black SUV with tinted windows, drove past slowly before disappearing around a corner. Shaken, Rebecca remained in her car for several minutes, waiting to see if the SUV would return. When it didn't, she started the engine again, no longer feeling safe even at the sheriff's office. Instead, she drove to the only place in Clearwater where she was certain she would find safety and support, the home of her closest friend, Maggie Coleman. Maggie, a local veterinarian and Rebecca's friend since college, opened the door immediately. At her knock, concern etched on her face. "Rebecca? What's happened? You're white as a sheet." Inside Maggie's warm kitchen, Rebecca laid out everything she had discovered: the burial ground, James's research, the missing tablet, and the SUV that had followed her from the farm. "I know how it sounds," she concluded, "like I'm imagining conspiracies because I can't accept that James's death was an accident. But the more I learn, the more convinced I am that he discovered something important enough that someone wanted to keep it hidden." Maggie, to her credit, didn't dismiss Rebecca's concerns. "James was the most careful driver I knew, and he was passionate about historical preservation. It's one of the reasons he bought that particular property in the first place. If he found evidence of a significant Native American site, he absolutely would have protected it, regardless of financial pressure. But who would go so far as to cause a fatal accident over an archaeological find?" Rebecca asked. "Money," Maggie said simply. "That farm sits on what's becoming prime real estate as Clearwater expands. Victor Montgomery has invested millions in his development plans. Historical preservation laws could block those plans entirely, costing him millions more." Rebecca remembered the business card in James's files. "I need to call someone else who might be able to help us understand what James found." Nathan Blackwater, Cultural Preservation Officer for the Pawnee Nation, answered his office phone despite the late hour. "Mrs. Harlow," he said after she introduced herself, "your husband contacted our office about a potential discovery on your property. We were deeply saddened to hear of his passing before we could properly investigate his findings." Rebecca explained what she had discovered in James's research and the photos of the tablet. "I believe whatever he found might be significant enough that someone wanted to prevent its documentation. Based on the description and location, your husband's property may contain something our historians have been seeking for generations." Nathan replied, his voice serious. "According to our oral traditions, a sacred council ground existed along Stillwater Creek, where important ceremonies were conducted and spiritual leaders were buried. Its exact location was lost during the forced relocations of the 1800s. Could a stone tablet be important enough to kill for? If it's what I suspect from your description, a star chart tablet used in spiritual ceremonies, then yes, it would be considered a significant cultural artifact that would trigger immediate preservation protections for the entire site." "I've arranged for an archaeologist to visit tomorrow morning," Rebecca said. "Would you be willing to join us? I think James would have wanted representatives from the Pawnee Nation involved in documenting whatever he found." "I can be there by noon tomorrow," Nathan confirmed. "In the meantime, be careful, Mrs. Harlow. If someone is willing to go to such lengths to acquire that land, they may not hesitate to act again if they feel threatened." After ending the call, Rebecca turned to find Maggie watching her with a mixture of concern and admiration. "You're really doing this," Maggie said, "taking up James's cause." Rebecca considered this. When she had driven to the farm that morning, her only intention had been to prepare the property for a quick sale. Now, less than 24 hours later, she was potentially uncovering a conspiracy connected to her husband's death and a historical discovery that could change the understanding of the region's Native American heritage. "I have to," she replied simply. "If what happened to James wasn't an accident, I need to know. And if what he found is as important as everyone seems to think, It deserves to be protected. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but within Maggie's home, Rebecca felt a growing sense of purpose replacing her earlier fear. Tomorrow she would return to the farm with experts who could help her understand the significance of James's discovery. Together, they would find the missing tablet and ensure that whatever secrets lay beneath the ancient oak tree would finally come to light, regardless of who might wish them to remain buried. As she prepared for bed in Maggie's guest room, Rebecca glanced at her wedding ring, twisting it absently as she had done countless times since James's death. For the first time, she felt a connection to him stronger than grief, a shared purpose that transcended his absence. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would face it with the determination to honor not just his memory, but the cause that had become his final mission. Morning arrived with a clarity that belied the emotional storm within Rebecca. As she stood on Maggie's porch, watching the sun illuminate the rain-washed landscape, she felt a strange duality, grief for the husband she had lost and determination to uncover the truth he had died protecting. The questions that had seemed overwhelming the night before now crystallized into a single purpose. She needed to find that tablet. "You're sure you don't want me to come with you?" Maggie asked, handing her a travel mug of coffee. "I could reschedule my morning appointments." Rebecca shook her head. "Dr. Blackwood will be there soon, and the Pawnee representative is coming at noon. I need to prepare the site for them." "Just be careful," Maggie cautioned. "If someone followed you yesterday." "I'll keep my phone on and call at the first sign of trouble," Rebecca promised. The drive back to the farm felt different in the morning light. What had seemed like an unwanted inheritance just 24 hours ago now represented something far more significant, a historical site of potentially immense cultural importance, and perhaps the key to understanding her husband's death. As she turned onto the gravel driveway, Rebecca was startled to see a vehicle already parked near the farmhouse, not Dr. Blackwood's, but a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. Standing on the porch was a man in expensive suit, checking his watch impatiently. Rebecca parked some distance away, suddenly wary. When the man spotted her, he straightened his tie and approached with a practiced smile. "Mrs. Harlow? I'm Richard Turner, Chief Operations Officer for Clearwater Development Group." He extended his hand, which Rebecca did not take. Undeterred, he continued, "I apologize for arriving unannounced, but we're very interested in discussing the purchase of this property. Our CEO, Mr. Montgomery, has authorized me to present a significantly improved offer." "How did you know I would be here this morning?" Rebecca asked, keeping her distance. Turner's smile didn't waver. "Your real estate agent mentioned you. We're evaluating the property, standard follow-up on our part." Rebecca doubted this explanation but decided to play along. "Mr. Turner, I'm not ready to make any decisions about selling. As you can see, I'm still going through my husband's affairs. Of course, and please accept my condolences on your loss." The words sounded rehearsed. "However, I should mention that our current offer has a 48-hour expiration window. The Regional Planning Committee meets next week, and we need to finalize our property acquisitions before then." "Why the rush?" Rebecca asked, watching his expression carefully. "Market dynamics," Turner replied smoothly. "Property values in this area are increasing rapidly. Our offer reflects current value plus a generous premium, but we can't extend that premium indefinitely." Rebecca noticed his gaze drifting toward the oak tree in the distance. "I understand my husband refused your previous offer. May I ask why?" A flicker of annoyance crossed Turner's face before his professional mask returned. Mr. Harlow had unrealistic expectations about the property's value. He also expressed concerns about certain areas of the land that, frankly, have no bearing on its market worth. "You mean the Native American burial ground," Rebecca stated flatly. Turner's smile tightened. "Mrs. Harlow, I'm afraid your husband was misinformed. Our environmental and historical assessment teams found no evidence of any significant archaeological features on this property. What appear to be unusual stone formations are simply the result of 19th century farming practices. That's interesting, Rebecca replied, considering I have an archaeologist and a representative from the Pawnee Nation coming today to evaluate the site. This clearly caught Turner off guard. That's an unnecessary expense. Our company has already conducted thorough surveys, which you'd be happy to share, I'm sure. Those are proprietary documents, but I can assure you they were comprehensive. Turner reached into his jacket and produced a business card and an envelope. My direct number is on the card. The envelope contains our offer, significantly above market value. I encourage you to review it before involving outside parties who might complicate matters with speculative claims. The implied threat wasn't subtle. Rebecca took the envelope but left the card on the ground. I'll be in touch, Mr. Turner. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have appointments to prepare for. Turner hesitated, clearly wanting to press his case further, but something in Rebecca's demeanor must have told him it would be counterproductive. With a curt nod, he returned to his car. As he drove away, Rebecca released the breath she'd been holding. Turner's unexpected appearance confirmed her suspicions. Clearwater Development was monitoring the property and was desperate to acquire it before its historical significance could be officially documented. Inside the farmhouse, she found James's work gloves and a small trowel in a kitchen drawer. Whatever had happened to the tablet, the burial site itself needed protection. She would mark it clearly for Dr. Blackwood and Nathan Blackwater to examine. At the oak tree, Rebecca began carefully clearing debris from around the stone markers, making them more visible without disturbing their placement. As she worked, she noticed something she had missed before: small pieces of colored cloth tied to the lowest branches of the oak tree. They were weathered and faded, nearly the same color as the bark, but clearly placed there intentionally. Prayer cloths. Rebecca had taught enough Native American history in her art classes to recognize them. This site hadn't been abandoned or forgotten. It had been visited, honored, and maintained, perhaps secretly, over generations. You're beginning to understand, the voice startled her. Turning, Rebecca found an older woman standing at the edge of the clearing. She wore jeans and a practical jacket, her silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a braid. Her features suggested Native American heritage, and her eyes held a depth of knowledge that immediately commanded respect. "I'm sorry," Rebecca said, standing. "I didn't hear you approach." "I'm Dr. Eliza Blackwood," the woman said, extending her hand. "And you must be Rebecca Harlow." "You're earlier than I expected," Rebecca replied, shaking her hand. "After your call, I did some additional research that made me think time might be of the essence." Dr. Blackwood surveyed the site with practiced eyes. "Your husband contacted me about 3 weeks ago. He was very careful in his description, mentioned unusual stone formations and possible cultural artifacts. It wasn't until he sent photos of the specific arrangement pattern that I realized what he might have found." "Which is what, exactly?" Dr. Blackwood knelt beside one of the larger stones. "If I'm correct, this is a ceremonial council ground of the Pawnee Nation, specifically of the Skeety Band, who were known for their sophisticated astronomical knowledge. The pattern of these stones corresponds to star alignments significant in their spiritual practices." "And the tablet James found?" "Potentially a star chart used in ceremonies," Dr. Blackwood replied. The Pawnee had a complex understanding of celestial movements that influenced everything from planting times to religious ceremonies. A preserved tablet with astronomical notations would be of immense historical and cultural significance. Significant enough that someone would want to prevent its discovery? Rebecca asked. Dr. Blackwood met her gaze directly. "If this site is what I believe it is, federal and state laws would immediately protect it from any development. That would be extremely problematic for companies like Clearwater, that have invested millions in expansion plans for this area. Rebecca described Turner's visit and his claim that Clearwater had already surveyed the property and found nothing of historical significance. A common tactic, Dr. Blackwood said, shaking her head. Conduct a superficial survey. Deliberately avoid areas likely to contain artifacts. Then claim due diligence has been performed. By the time a proper archaeological assessment can be organized, bulldozers have already destroyed the evidence. One of their representatives was here when I arrived this morning, Rebecca said. They're offering well above market value, but the offer expires in 48 hours. Another standard pressure tactic, Dr. Blackwood nodded. They're racing against the clock of discovery. Together, they examined the site more thoroughly. Dr. Blackwood took measurements and photographs, occasionally consulting reference materials on her tablet. She confirmed Rebecca's discovery of the prayer cloths, noting their significance. These indicate the site has remained spiritually active, she explained. Even after the Pawnee were forcibly relocated, members of the tribe likely returned secretly to maintain their connection to this sacred ground. Could James have reburied the tablet somewhere else for safekeeping? Rebecca asked as they widened their search area. He was very protective of the site. It's possible. Did he have any secure places where he kept important items? Rebecca thought for a moment. There's a floor safe in his study. I found financial documents there, but I didn't see any key or combination for another safe. They returned to the farmhouse where Rebecca showed Dr. Blackwood James's research materials. The archaeologist examined everything carefully, making notes and occasionally nodding to herself. Your husband was thorough, she commented. He approached this discovery with respect and proper methodology. These notes show he was consulting the right sources and reaching out to appropriate authorities. In the study, they searched for any indication of where James might have hidden a tablet. Rebecca opened drawers, checked behind books, and examined the ceiling and floorboards for signs of concealment. Wait, Dr. Blackwood said suddenly. Look at this. She pointed to a series of numbers James had written in the margin of his research notes. These look like coordinates, but they're too short for GPS positions. Rebecca stared at the numbers, then at the room around them. What if they're measurements? Like distance and direction from a fixed point. They returned to the oak tree, measuring exactly as the numbers indicated, 15 feet north from the tree's trunk, then 7 feet east. The spot appeared unremarkable, covered with grass and fallen leaves. There's something here, Dr. Blackwood said, carefully brushing away debris. A flat stone, about 2 feet square, lay flush with the ground. Unlike the ancient markers, this stone appeared relatively new and deliberately placed. Together, they carefully lifted the stone to reveal a small cavity beneath. Inside was a metal box, the kind used for fireproof document storage. Rebecca opened it with trembling hands. Inside, wrapped in acid-free archival tissue, was the tablet from James's photographs, approximately 8 inches square, made of a dark stone, its surface covered with intricate carvings. Beside it was a sealed envelope with Rebecca's name written in James's handwriting. This is extraordinary, Dr. Blackwood breathed, examining the tablet without touching it. Preliminary assessment suggests this is authentic and potentially dates back several centuries. The symbols are consistent with known Pawnee star charts. Rebecca opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. Rebecca, if you're reading this, something has happened to me, or you've discovered what I've been protecting here. I'm sorry I didn't share this with you sooner. At first, I wasn't sure what I'd found, and then, when I understood its significance, I was concerned that knowledge might put you at risk. The stone tablet is a sacred astronomical record of the Skeety Pawnee. According to the experts I've consulted, it records specific celestial events and may be one of the only surviving examples of its kind. More importantly, its presence confirms this site is a ceremonial ground and burial place that deserves protection. Clearwater Development has been pressuring landowners throughout the county to sell. When I refused, their representatives became increasingly aggressive. Last week, I found evidence that someone had been examining the stone markers when I wasn't present. I've documented everything and reached out to both academic experts and tribal representatives. If anything happens to me, please ensure this tablet and this site are properly protected. It's not just about preserving history. It's about respecting the sacred trust we inherited when we became caretakers of this land. I know you never understood why this farm meant so much to me. Perhaps now you will. Some connections to the land transcend ownership. They become a responsibility to past and future generations. All my love, James. Rebecca folded the letter with tears in her eyes. James had known he was in danger. He had taken precautions to protect both the discovery and her. Yet somehow, it hadn't been enough. Your husband understood the significance of what he found, Dr. Blackwood said gently. This tablet and this site represent a direct connection to indigenous knowledge that colonial forces tried to erase. Its protection would have been worth fighting for. The sound of an approaching vehicle drew their attention. A pickup truck was coming up the driveway, followed by the black sedan Rebecca had seen earlier. Turner had returned, and he wasn't alone. That's Nathan Blackwater, Dr. Blackwood said, recognizing the driver of the pickup. And it appears your developer friend has brought reinforcements. They carefully returned the tablet to its protective box. We need to document everything properly, Dr. Blackwood said. Once the site is officially recorded with the State Historical Preservation Office and the tribal authorities, it will have legal protection. As they approached the vehicles, Rebecca could see the tension in the body language of both parties. Nathan Blackwater, a dignified man in his 50s wearing a jacket with the Pawnee Nation emblem, stood with his arms crossed, clearly in a confrontation with Turner and another man in an expensive suit. Mrs. Harlow, Turner called as she approached. I see you've already involved outside parties. This is unfortunate timing. Allow me to introduce Victor Montgomery, CEO of Clearwater Development Group. Montgomery was tall and imposing, with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to getting his way. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he extended his hand. Mrs. Harlow, a pleasure. I understand Richard has presented our offer. I wanted to personally express our interest in your property. Rebecca ignored the outstretched hand. Mr. Montgomery, this is Dr. Eliza Blackwood from the University of Nebraska, and Nathan Blackwater, Cultural Preservation Officer for the Pawnee Nation. They're here to document a significant archaeological and cultural site on this property. Montgomery's smile tightened. Yes, Richard mentioned you had some concerns about potential historical features. I assure you our surveys found nothing that would meet the threshold for protection under preservation statutes. Perhaps your surveys weren't looking in the right places, Dr. Blackwood replied evenly. Or perhaps they weren't designed to find anything that might interfere with your development plans. Nathan Blackwater stepped forward. Mrs. Harlow, on behalf of the Pawnee Nation, I want to thank you for contacting us. Based on the information your husband provided and our preliminary assessment, we believe this site may be the Lost Council, ground of our ancestors, a place of immense spiritual and cultural significance. Montgomery's facade of pleasantness was beginning to crack. While I respect indigenous cultural claims, they must be substantiated through proper channels. Unverified assertions can't halt legitimate development projects that will bring economic benefits to the entire community. We have more than assertions, Rebecca said. She held up the metal box. We have artifacts. Specifically, a ceremonial tablet that confirms this site's significance. The change in Montgomery's expression was subtle but unmistakable, a flash of alarm quickly masked by practice control. Any artifacts would need to be authenticated by qualified experts, a process that can take months or years. Which is why we've already contacted the State Historical Preservation Office, Dr. Blackwood stated. Their representative will be here this afternoon to begin the official documentation process. This was news to Rebecca, but she maintained a neutral expression, grateful for Dr. Blackwood's foresight. Montgomery exchanged a glance with Turner. "Mrs. Harlow, perhaps we could speak privately. This situation has become unnecessarily adversarial. I'm confident we can find a solution that addresses everyone's concerns." "There's nothing to discuss," Rebecca replied firmly. "This site will be properly documented and protected according to federal and state laws. Your development plans will need to accommodate that reality." Montgomery's pleasant mask slipped entirely. "You should consider your position carefully. Your husband's farm is heavily mortgaged. The bank could foreclose at any time. Our offer provides financial security that archaeological speculation cannot." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Montgomery?" Rebecca asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Not at all. Merely pointing out economic realities." Montgomery straightened his tie. "We'll be in touch after you've had time to reconsider. The offer remains open for 48 hours. As Montgomery and Turner returned to their car, Nathan approached Rebecca. "Your husband contacted our office about a month ago. He sent photographs of the stone markers and described finding evidence of a ceremonial ground. We were in the process of arranging a site visit when we received news of his death." "It wasn't an accident," Rebecca said with sudden certainty. "James found this tablet, documented it, and reached out to the right authorities. Someone wanted to prevent that documentation from being completed." "A serious accusation," Nathan replied, "but not an implausible one, given what's at stake. This land holds tremendous spiritual significance for our people. If it is indeed the council ground described in our oral histories, it would be one of the most important Pawnee sites ever rediscovered." Dr. Blackwood carefully opened the metal box, allowing Nathan to see the tablet without touching it. His expression became reverent. "This is genuine," he said after studying it. "The symbols match our traditional star knowledge. This tablet would have been used by spiritual leaders to track celestial movements and determine the timing of sacred ceremonies. Can you help us protect it?" Rebecca asked. "The Pawnee Nation will file for immediate protection under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. Once the state archaeological team documents the site, it will qualify for inclusion in the National Register of Historic Places." Nathan met Rebecca's gaze. "But legal proceedings take time, and powerful interests like Clearwater Development have ways of creating delays. So what do we do in the meantime?" "We stand our ground," Nathan replied simply. "My people have been protecting sacred sites against those who would destroy them for over 200 years. We've learned persistence." As they walked back to the oak tree, Rebecca felt a growing sense of purpose. The farm that had once seemed like a burden, James's failed dream, now represented something far more significant, a direct connection to the history that had been deliberately obscured and nearly forgotten. "Your husband understood the importance of this place," Nathan said as they stood beneath the ancient oak. "He recognized that being a landowner also meant being a caretaker. That's a wisdom many have forgotten." Rebecca thought of James's letter. Some connections to the land transcend ownership. They become a responsibility to past and future generations. In protecting this site, he had been honoring something deeper than property rights. He had recognized a sacred trust. As the afternoon sun filtered through the oak's branches, casting dappled light across the stone markers, Rebecca made her decision. This farm, this sacred ground, would not become another casualty of development. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the same determination that had driven James to protect this place, even at the cost of his life. The battle for Riverbed Farm had only just begun. The next 48 hours transformed Rebecca's understanding of both her husband's final mission and the forces aligned against it. The farmhouse became a hub of activity as archaeological experts, tribal representatives, and state officials came to document the site. The ancient oak tree, once simply a distinctive landmark on a failing farm, now stood at the center of what Dr. Blackwood called one of the most significant cultural discoveries in the region in decades. Rebecca watched as the team carefully mapped the stone markers, took soil samples, and photographed every aspect of the site. The tablet, secured in a proper conservation container, had been officially documented and registered with both the State Historical Preservation Office and the Pawnee Nation Cultural Authority. Its existence alone would have been enough to trigger protective measures, but the comprehensive nature of the site, a ceremonial ground, burial place, and astronomical observation point, elevated its significance even further. The preliminary carbon dating of organic material near the deepest stones suggests this site has been in ceremonial use for at least 500 years. Dr. Blackwood explained as they reviewed findings in what had been James's study. The oak itself germinated around 1450 CE and appears to have been deliberately incorporated into the sacred space. Nathan Blackwater nodded, adding, "This aligns with our oral traditions. The council ground was established during a time of significant spiritual renewal, when our people were seeking to strengthen their connection to the stars and the Creator." The documentation process had barely been completed when Montgomery's 48-hour deadline expired. Rebecca had expected some form of retaliation, but the nature of Clearwater Development's response still caught her off guard. Maggie called. Early on the third morning, her voice tense. "Rebecca, have you seen today's Clearwater Chronicle?" "No, I've been at the farm since dawn. What's happened?" "You need to see this. I'm texting you a photo of the front page now." The image that appeared on Rebecca's phone made her blood run cold. Under the headline, "Historical Hoax Threatens County's Economic Future," was a photo of the oak tree site with Rebecca, Dr. Blackwood, and Nathan examining the stone markers. The article claimed that opportunistic outside interests were manufacturing archaeological significance to block vital development projects that would bring hundreds of jobs to the community. Most disturbing was a quote attributed to a source close to the investigation, claiming that James Harlow had deliberately planted artifacts on the property to increase its value after his farming venture failed. "They're calling James a fraud," Rebecca said, her voice shaking with anger. "They're claiming he fabricated the entire discovery." "It gets worse," Maggie replied. The article mentions that the county commissioners have called an emergency meeting this afternoon to discuss revising the Historical Preservation Ordinance. "They're trying to change the rules before your site can be officially protected." Nathan and Dr. Blackwood arrived at the farmhouse just as Rebecca ended the call, both carrying copies of the newspaper. "Classic intimidation tactics," Dr. Blackwood said, tossing the paper onto the kitchen table. "When they can't buy you off, they attempt to discredit both the discovery and the people documenting it. They're also pursuing political channels." Nathan added grimly, "I've just received word that Clearwater Development has filed a formal challenge to our protection claim, alleging insufficient evidence and procedural irregularities." Rebecca stared at the newspaper, at the photo of herself standing proudly by the ancient oak that James had died protecting. In just a few days, she had gone from being a grieving widow seeking to sell an unwanted property to a public enemy, supposedly threatening the county's economic future. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We fight on multiple fronts," Nathan replied. "Legal, political, and public opinion. Clearwater Development has resources, but they also have vulnerabilities. Their entire business model depends on moving quickly, acquiring properties before their value increases, and developing them before opposition can organize. They're also counting on the community prioritizing potential economic benefits over historical preservation," Dr. Blackwood added. "We need to change that narrative." The county commissioners' meeting that afternoon became the first battleground. The small chamber was packed beyond capacity, with people spilling into the hallway. Rebecca immediately noticed the divide. On one side, Clearwater Development employees and supporters wearing Progress for Clearwater buttons. On the other, a smaller but passionate group including members of the Pawnee Nation, university researchers, and environmental activists. Victor Montgomery sat in the front row, perfectly at ease, occasionally turning to shake hands with supporters. When he spotted Rebecca entering with Nathan and Dr. Blackwood, his expression remained pleasant, but his eyes hardened. The meeting began with a proposal from Commissioner Wilson, whom Rebecca recognized as a former business partner of Montgomery's. The proposal would streamline the historical preservation review process, creating a fast-track option for economically significant development projects and requiring definitive scientific consensus before any property could receive protected status. These common-sense reforms will prevent frivolous historical claims from delaying progress, while still protecting genuinely significant sites, Wilson explained, his rehearsed speech clearly designed to sound reasonable. When the floor opened for public comments, Montgomery was the first to speak. His presentation was polished and compelling, full of promises about job creation, increased tax revenue, and community amenities. He spoke of Clearwater's bright future being held hostage by dubious historical claims and outside agitators with no stake in the community's economic welfare. Several business owners followed, all echoing support for the proposed changes and expressing concern about excessive regulations hampering growth. The momentum seemed entirely on Clearwater Development's side until Nathan Blackwater approached the podium. My ancestors lived on this land for thousands of years before it was called Clearwater County, he began, his dignified presence commanding attention. They observed the stars from the council ground that Mr. Montgomery wishes to bulldoze for luxury condominiums. They conducted sacred ceremonies beneath an oak tree that was already 100 years old when the first European settlers arrived. The room grew quieter as he continued. The Pawnee people have survived forced relocation, cultural suppression, and the theft of our lands. We have watched sacred sites paved over for parking lots and burial grounds desecrated for shopping centers. Each time we were told it was in the name of progress. Nathan looked directly at Montgomery. Progress for whom? Not for the people whose history is erased. Not for the community whose cultural heritage sacrificed for short-term profit. What Mr. Montgomery calls a frivolous historical claim is actually one of the most significant Native American cultural sites discovered in this region in decades. Dr. Blackwood spoke next, presenting the preliminary scientific findings in clear, accessible terms. She explained the carbon dating results, the astronomical alignment of the stone markers, and the significance of the tablet, all documented through rigorous archaeological methods. This is not a matter of opinion or interpretation, she concluded. The evidence meets every established scientific standard for historical significance. Changing the preservation ordinance to circumvent this evidence would be an act of cultural vandalism. When Rebecca's turn came, she approached the podium with knees trembling but voice steady. She had prepared notes but set them aside, deciding instead to speak directly from her heart. My name is Rebecca Harlow. 3 months ago, I lost my husband in what I believed was a tragic accident. A week ago, I intended to sell his failing farm as quickly as possible and move on with my life. She paused, meeting the eyes of various commissioners. Instead, I discovered that James had found something extraordinary, a direct connection to the history of this land before it was called America. Rebecca held up the front page of that morning's newspaper. This article suggests my husband fabricated archaeological evidence to increase property values. Those who knew James understand how absurd that claim is. He was a man who left a successful accounting career because he believed in sustainable farming and responsible stewardship of the land. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. What this community faces isn't a choice between progress and preservation. It's a choice about what kind of progress we value. Do we measure success only in property values and tax revenue? Or do we recognize that our connection to history, all of our history, including the indigenous peoples who were here first, enriches us in ways that can't be entered on a balance sheet? Rebecca pointed toward Montgomery. Clearwater development offers jobs and economic growth. Those are important. But they come at the cost of erasing a sacred site that has stood for 500 years. Once bulldozed, it can never be recovered. Is that the legacy we want to leave for future generations? As Rebecca returned to her seat, an elderly man she didn't recognize stood up despite not being called on. "My name is Robert Jenkins," he announced. "My family has farmed in this county for 4 generations. I'm not an archaeologist or a Native American or an activist, but I know this land, and I know what matters." The commissioners, clearly surprised, allowed him to continue. "Mr. Montgomery approached me last year about selling my property. When I refused, strange things started happening. Equipment failures, problems with bank loans. Suddenly the county was finding code violations on buildings that had stood for decades." Jenkins looked around the room. "I'm not the only one. Ask the Thompsons, ask the Morrisons. Anyone who refused to sell has faced similar coincidences." A murmur ran through the crowd as others nodded in recognition. "James Harlow called me about 2 months ago," Jenkins continued. "He was documenting these patterns, gathering statements from other landowners who'd been pressured to sell. He said something wasn't right about how Clearwater Development operated." This revelation hit Rebecca like a physical blow. James hadn't just been protecting the archaeological site. He had been investigating Clearwater's business practices. The implications were staggering. Montgomery rose smoothly. "These unsubstantiated allegations are both false and defamatory. Clearwater Development operates with the highest ethical standards. We negotiate fairly with all property owners. Is that why you filed a foreclosure petition against the Harlow farm yesterday?" A voice called from the back of the room. Heads turned to see Sheriff Tom Daniels standing by the door, his expression grim. "My office received the notification this morning. Seems convenient timing, given the historical preservation claim." Montgomery's composure faltered slightly. "That's a standard business procedure when a property has defaulted on loan payments. It has nothing to do with the archaeological dispute." "Interesting coincidence, though," the sheriff replied. "Especially since the bank holding that mortgage is chaired by your brother-in-law." The meeting descended into chaos as multiple conversations erupted simultaneously. Commissioner Wilson struggled to restore order, eventually calling a 15-minute recess. As people filed out of the chamber, Rebecca found herself approached by several farmers and small business owners, all with similar stories of pressure and intimidation from Clearwater Development. James was building a case, Robert Jenkins told her quietly, documenting a pattern of predatory practices. When he discovered that Native American site, it became personal for him, another example of something valuable being destroyed for profit. The realization that James had been fighting Clearwater on multiple fronts, both protecting the sacred site and investigating their business practices, made his death seem even more suspicious. Had he been silenced not just to clear the way for development, but to stop an investigation that might have exposed illegal activities? When the meeting reconvened, the mood had shifted. Commissioner Wilson, clearly sensing the changing tide, suggested tabling the ordinance changes pending further community input. 3 other commissioners quickly agreed, leaving only one, Montgomery's former business partner, in opposition. Outside the chamber, Montgomery intercepted Rebecca. His public smile was gone, replaced by cold determination. "You've made a serious mistake, Mrs. Harlow," he said quietly. "This delay is temporary. The foreclosure will proceed, and once the bank takes possession, your husband's fantasies about ancient burial grounds will become irrelevant." Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "You're wrong about many things, Mr. Montgomery, most of all about what happens when you threaten people who have nothing left to lose. I'm not afraid of you. You should be, he replied. Ask your husband. Oh wait, you can't. Before Rebecca could respond, Sheriff Daniels approached. Everything all right? Here. Montgomery's mask of civility instantly returned. Just clarifying some misunderstandings. Good day, Mrs. Harlow. He nodded to the sheriff and walked away. That man has made a lot of enemies in this county, Daniels observed. And your husband was connecting the dots before his accident. Rebecca studied the sheriff's weathered face. You don't think it was an accident either, do you? Daniel sighed. The investigation concluded it was. Single vehicle crash on a rainy night, no witnesses. But James Harlow was a careful driver, and the brake lines on his truck showed unusual wear patterns. Nothing conclusive enough to reopen the case, but enough to make me wonder. He was building a case against Clearwater Development, Rebecca said. And he found a Native American sacred site that would block their biggest project. Either one might have made him a target. Without evidence, that's just speculation, Daniels cautioned. But if you find anything concrete in your husband's papers about threats or suspicious activities, bring it to me directly. That evening, back at the farmhouse, Rebecca, Nathan, and Dr. Blackwood took stock of their situation. The emergency meeting had ended in their favor, but Montgomery's threat of foreclosure represented a new and immediate danger. If the bank takes possession, they could sell directly to Clearwater Development before the historical designation is finalized. Dr. Blackwood explained. The protection process typically takes 60 to 90 days to complete. We don't have that kind of time, Rebecca said, reviewing the foreclosure notice. According to this, the bank can take possession in 30 days unless all outstanding payments are brought current. That's over $20,000 we don't have. Nathan had been quiet, listening intently. Now he looked up from his phone with renewed purpose. The tribal council just concluded an emergency session. The Pawnee Nation is prepared to file for an emergency protective order under federal law that would temporarily prevent any development activity on the site, regardless of ownership. Will that stop the foreclosure? Rebecca asked. No, but it buys us time to pursue other options. And I have an idea about that as well. Nathan leaned forward. What if we don't fight the development entirely, but instead negotiate for the preservation of the sacred site? You mean compromise with Montgomery? Rebecca asked skeptically. Not with Montgomery. Around him. Nathan's eyes held a strategic gleam. Clearwater Development isn't a single entity. It has investors, partners, and a board of directors. If Montgomery is using questionable tactics, those other stakeholders might not be fully aware of the risks they're taking. Dr. Blackwood nodded slowly. Corporate investors are generally risk-averse. If they learned that Montgomery was potentially involved in activities that could lead to legal complications, we need to find out who's really backing Clearwater Development, Rebecca concluded. And we need to find whatever evidence James was collecting about their business practices. The search began that night. Rebecca combed through James's study with new purpose, looking not just for information about the archaeological site, but for any documentation of Clearwater's predatory tactics. In a locked file cabinet, she found a thumb drive labeled simply CDG evidence. The drive contained dozens of files, statements from landowners describing pressure tactics, financial records showing suspicious patterns of loan denials after refusing to sell to Clearwater, photographs of construction equipment mysteriously damaged, and most damning of all, recordings of conversations in which Clearwater representatives made veiled threats. James was thorough, Dr. Blackwood said as they reviewed the materials. He was building a comprehensive case, but who was he building it for? Rebecca wondered. The answer came in the final folder on the drive, correspondence with the State Attorney General's office. James had been in contact with a special prosecutor investigating corporate land fraud. His final email, sent just days before his death, mentioned significant new evidence and requested an in-person meeting. "This changes everything," Nathan said quietly. "Your husband wasn't just protecting a sacred site. He was working with law enforcement to expose criminal activity." Rebecca felt a complex mixture of emotions: pride in James's courage, grief at his loss, and renewed determination to complete what he had started. "We need to get this evidence to the authorities immediately. And we need to protect ourselves," Dr. Blackwood added. "If Montgomery silenced James to prevent this information from coming to light, he might take similar action against anyone else who threatens his operation." That night, as Rebecca prepared for bed in what had been the guest room of her husband's farmhouse, she found herself examining a photograph of James that stood on the bedside table. It showed him standing proudly beside his first harvest, his face alight with the joy of connection to the land. She had never fully understood that joy until now, until she had felt the pull of something deeper than property ownership, something that connected past, present, and future in an unbroken line. "I understand now," she whispered to the photograph, "and I won't let them destroy what you protected." Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by dreams of the ancient oak, its branches reaching toward stars that seemed to move in patterns matching the symbols on the stone tablet. In her dream, James stood beneath the tree, not alone but surrounded by shadowy figures who seemed to belong to another time. When he turned toward her, his expression was peaceful, as if he had found his place in a story much larger than himself. Rebecca woke before dawn with a clarity of purpose that transcended her grief. The path forward would be difficult and dangerous, but for the first time since James's death, she felt certain of her direction. This wasn't just about honoring her husband's memory or protecting the historical site. It was about standing against the kind of power that saw nothing sacred in the land, that recognized no value beyond profit margins and development potential. As the first light of morning illuminated the ancient oak on the hill, Rebecca made a promise to herself and to the generations whose sacred trust she had inherited. Clearwater Development had built its empire by isolating and intimidating those who stood in its way. But they had never faced the kind of alliance now forming: a widow with nothing left to lose, a native nation reclaiming its heritage, a community awakening to both its past and its future. The battle for James Harlow's legacy had evolved into something far more significant: a stand for the soul of Clearwater County itself. Dawn broke over Clearwater County with the promise of transformation. Rebecca stood on the farmhouse porch, watching golden light illuminate the ancient oak that had become the center of her world. 3 weeks had passed since she'd discovered the evidence James had collected. 3 weeks of relentless work, unexpected alliances, and growing momentum against forces that had once seemed invincible. The foreclosure clock was still ticking, with just 9 days remaining before the bank could legally seize the property. But much had changed since Montgomery had made his threat outside the county commissioner's meeting. The thumb drive labeled CDG evidence had proven to be James's most powerful legacy, a meticulously documented case against Clearwater Development's predatory business practices. "Morning," called Maggie, emerging from the farmhouse with 2 steaming mugs. She handed one to Rebecca. "Thought you could use this before the reporters arrive." Rebecca accepted the coffee gratefully. The farmhouse had become command central for what local media was now calling the battle for Harlow Farm. Every morning brought a new development, another piece of the strategy falling into place. "Nathan called," Maggie continued. "The tribal council unanimously approved the joint proposal. They're prepared to move forward as soon as you give the word." Rebecca nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and nervous anticipation. The plan they had developed was bold, perhaps even revolutionary, a complete reimagining of what the land might become. "And Sheriff Daniels?" she asked. "He'll be here at 9 with the state investigators. The special prosecutor wants to review everything one more time before filing charges." The evidence James had gathered had opened a floodgate. Once Rebecca had turned over the thumb drive to authorities, other victims of Clearwater's tactics had come forward. The state attorney general's office had launched a formal investigation into allegations of fraud, intimidation, bribery of public officials, and environmental violations spanning 5 counties. Most significantly, forensic analysts had found enough irregularities in the investigation of James's accident to justify reopening the case. The brake lines of his truck showed signs of deliberate tampering, microscopic tool marks inconsistent with normal wear or environmental damage. Rebecca. Dr. Blackwood called from the driveway, where she was directing a team of university students unloading equipment. The ground-penetrating radar team is ready to begin the final survey. The archaeological work had continued alongside the legal battle, with each new discovery strengthening the site's claim for protection. The stone tablet had been definitively authenticated as a rare, ceremonial artifact dating to approximately 1650 CE. Soil samples had confirmed the presence of multiple burial sites arranged in a pattern corresponding to specific star formations significant in Pawnee cosmology. "Tell them to wait until the tribal representatives arrive," Rebecca called back. Nathan was clear about having cultural monitors present for any subsurface imaging. The integration of archaeological science with indigenous cultural protocols had become a hallmark of the project, a model of respectful collaboration that Dr. Blackwood was already documenting for academic publication. As Rebecca finished her coffee, a convoy of vehicles appeared on the horizon, news vans from local and regional stations, followed by cars bearing the logos of state agencies and tribal governments. The press conference scheduled for 10 o'clock would announce a development that no one had anticipated when this struggle began. "Are you ready for this?" Maggie asked, taking in the approaching media circus. Rebecca took a deep breath. 3 weeks ago, I was a grieving widow who just wanted to sell a failing farm. Now I'm about to announce a partnership that could change how cultural preservation works in this state." She smiled wryly. "Ready isn't exactly the word I'd use." "Destined, then," Maggie suggested. "Some people spend their whole lives looking for purpose. Yours found you." The farmyard transformed into an impromptu media center as reporters set up cameras and microphones. Representatives from the Pawnee Nation arrived, including elders who examined the sacred site with reverent attention. State officials conferred with archaeologists while university students erected displays showing the significance of the discoveries. At precisely 9 o'clock, Sheriff Daniels arrived with 2 serious-looking individuals in professional attire. Special Prosecutor Amelia Chun from the State Attorney General's office and Special Agent Marcus Reynolds from the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. Mrs. Harlow, Prosecutor Chun greeted her with a firm handshake. "I want to personally thank you for bringing your husband's evidence to our attention. His documentation was extraordinarily thorough." "James was meticulous by nature," Rebecca replied. "Once he realized what was happening in the county, he approached it like an audit. His evidence provided the foundation for what has become a multi-jurisdictional investigation," Agent Reynolds added. "We've identified a pattern of corruption extending beyond Clearwater development to multiple county officials and state regulatory bodies. Inside the farmhouse, they reviewed the latest developments in the case." Prosecutor Chen spread documents across the kitchen table that had once held James's farming journals. "We're filing formal charges today against Victor Montgomery and 4 other Clearwater executives," she explained. "Wire fraud, racketeering, conspiracy, witness intimidation, and in light of the new evidence regarding your husband's vehicle, possible homicide charges pending further investigation." Sheriff Daniels cleared his throat. "There's something else you should know, Rebecca. We executed a search warrant at Montgomery's home office yesterday. Found documentation suggesting he was specifically targeting your husband's property even before the archaeological discovery." Why? Rebecca asked. The farm was struggling. There are more valuable properties in the county. Because of the water rights, the sheriff replied. Your property controls access to the underground aquifer that would be necessary for Montgomery's planned golf course and residential development. Without those rights, the entire project becomes unfeasible. This revelation cast James's struggle in a new light. He hadn't just been a random obstacle to Clearwater's plans, he had been the key obstacle. The archaeological discovery had simply made him a more determined adversary. Montgomery must have thought he'd solved his problem when James died. Rebecca said quietly, "He couldn't have anticipated that I would continue the fight." Few would have, Prosecutor Chun acknowledged. Most people would have sold the property and moved on, especially facing foreclosure. Your decision to investigate changed everything. At 10 o'clock, Rebecca stepped onto the porch to face the assembled media. Beside her stood Nathan Blackwater, Dr. Blackwood, Sheriff Daniels, and Prosecutor Chun. Behind them, representatives from state agencies, tribal governments, and the university created a powerful visual statement of unity. "Thank you all for coming," Rebecca began, her teacher's voice carrying clearly across the farmyard. 3 months ago, my husband James Harlow died protecting this land from those who saw it only as a commodity to be exploited. Today, we announce a new vision for Harlow Farm, one that honors its past, serves its present community, and protects it for future generations. She gestured to Nathan, who stepped forward. The Pawnee Nation and 5 other tribal nations, with historical connections to this region, have formed an unprecedented coalition. Together with Mrs. Harlow, the State Historical Society, and Clearwater County Conservation Trust, we are establishing the First Nations Cultural Heritage Center and Sustainable Agriculture Institute on this property. This announcement drew murmurs of surprise from the assembled reporters. Dr. Blackwood continued the explanation. The center will serve multiple purposes. First, it will protect and interpret the sacred council ground and burial site, allowing for both indigenous ceremonial use and educational programming. Second, it will demonstrate sustainable farming practices that honor both traditional indigenous agricultural knowledge and modern ecological science. Third, it will provide economic opportunities through educational tourism, research facilities, and agricultural training programs. Rebecca returned to the microphone. The most innovative aspect of this partnership is its legal structure. I am transferring ownership of the farm to a newly created land trust governed jointly by tribal representatives, conservation experts, and community members. This trust will hold the land in perpetuity, ensuring it can never be developed or exploited. A reporter raised her hand. "How does this affect the foreclosure proceedings initiated by First State Bank?" Rebecca smiled. "I'm pleased to announce that the foreclosure has been withdrawn. Once the bank's leadership understood the legal implications of attempting to seize property that contains documented Native American burial sites, they proved remarkably willing to negotiate an alternative solution." This diplomatic answer obscured the more complex reality. When bank officials had learned they were potentially implicated in Montgomery's corrupt practices, they had scrambled to distance themselves from Clearwater development. Faced with potential legal action under federal laws protecting Native American cultural sites, they had accepted a settlement that allowed them to exit the situation without admitting wrongdoing. Another reporter called out, "What about the criminal charges against Clearwater Development? Do you believe they were responsible for your husband's death?" Prosecutor Chun stepped forward. "As announced this morning, Victor Montgomery and 4 other Clearwater executives have been indicted on multiple felony counts including fraud, racketeering, and corruption. The investigation into James Harlow's death has been reopened based on new forensic evidence suggesting his vehicle was deliberately tampered with. We cannot comment further on ongoing investigations." The press conference continued for another 30 minutes, with questions focusing on the archaeological significance of the site, the unprecedented nature of the tribal coalition, and the future of the Heritage Center. Throughout, Rebecca maintained a quiet dignity that contrasted sharply with the turmoil of the past weeks. As the formal presentation concluded and reporters broke into smaller groups for follow-up interviews, Rebecca found herself approached by an elderly Pawnee woman who had been observing from beneath the ancient oak. "You have honored your husband's spirit," the woman said simply. "He found his way to this sacred place for a reason. Now you have found yours." The woman pressed something into Rebecca's palm, a small, smooth stone with natural markings resembling a star. "From the creek that runs through this land. Our people have gathered such stones for centuries as reminders of our connection to the stars above and the earth below." Before Rebecca could respond, the woman had moved away to join the tribal elders examining the stone markers. The simple interaction, away from cameras and microphones, felt more significant than all the formal announcements of the morning. By mid-afternoon, most of the media had departed, leaving only the core team to continue their work. Rebecca sat beneath the ancient oak, watching as archaeologists and tribal representatives carefully documented the site, using both scientific instruments and traditional knowledge. Sheriff Daniels joined her, lowering himself onto the grass with a grunt that spoke of decades of police work. "Thought you'd want to know. Montgomery surrendered to state authorities an hour ago." His attorney issued a statement denying all charges, "Of course. Of course," Rebecca replied. "Did they find Richard Turner?" "Not yet. He's disappeared, emptied his accounts and abandoned his house. That pretty much confirms he was involved in the illegal activities." Rebecca had suspected Turner was more deeply implicated than his role as Montgomery's representative suggested. His aggressive pursuit of the property and his knowledge of James's discovery had always seemed suspicious. "We'll find him," Daniels assured her. "Men like that always make mistakes when they run. Too used to power and privilege to be good at hiding." As the sheriff departed, Dr. Blackwood approached with Nathan and several tribal elders. "We've completed the preliminary survey," she reported. "The results confirm our initial assessment. This is one of the most intact ceremonial sites documented in the region. The combination of the stone markers, the burial locations, and the tablet create an exceptional historical record." "And now it's protected forever," Rebecca said, feeling a profound sense of completion. "Thanks to you," Nathan replied. "Most people would have seen only an old oak tree and some unusual rocks. You saw what your husband saw, something worth fighting for." That evening, after the last researchers had departed and the farmhouse fell silent, Rebecca walked alone to the sacred site. The setting sun cast long shadows across the grass, making the stone markers seem to reach toward the ancient oak like fingers stretching across time. She sat with her back against the massive trunk, feeling the rough bark press into her shoulders. From this vantage point, she could see the entire farm, the fields that would soon demonstrate sustainable agricultural practices, the barn that would become a research center, the house that would serve as an educational facility. All of it saved because James had recognized something sacred in this land and had been willing to defend it. All of it transformed because she had chosen to continue what he began, despite having every logical reason to walk away. Rebecca opened her hand to look at the star-marked stone the Pawnee elder had given her. Such a simple object, yet it connected her to countless generations who had gathered similar tokens from the same creek. People who had stood beneath this same oak, watching the same stars wheel overhead in eternal patterns. "I understand now," she said aloud, though there was no one to hear except perhaps the spirits of those who had tended this sacred ground for centuries. It was never about ownership. It was about stewardship. The First Nations cultural heritage. Center would open in the spring, bringing new life and purpose to land that had nearly been lost to development. The Sustainable Agriculture Program would plant its first crops where James had once struggled alone to make the farm viable. Researchers would study the astronomical alignments of the stone markers, preserving ancient knowledge for future generations. And Rebecca would find her own place in this continuing story, not as a grieving widow defining herself by loss, but as a woman who had discovered her own connection to something larger than herself. She had already accepted a position as educational director for the center, developing programs that would bring school children and community members to learn about both indigenous history and sustainable relationships with the land. The criminal case against Montgomery and his associates would continue through the courts, likely for years. The reopened investigation into James's death might eventually bring justice for his murder, though Rebecca had come to understand that justice took many forms. The protection of what he had died defending was perhaps the most meaningful justice of all. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared overhead, Rebecca felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The grief of James's loss would never entirely disappear, but it had been transformed into something generative, a catalyst for change that would benefit generations to come. She thought of the tablet, now safely preserved yet still connected to this place through memory and meaning. The ancient Pawnee had recorded their understanding of the stars as a guide for those who would follow. James had documented Montgomery's crimes as evidence for those who would continue his fight. Each had created a record that transcended their individual lives, becoming part of a larger story. Rising from her place beneath the oak, Rebecca took one last look at the farm that had become so much more than property. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the detailed planning for the Heritage Center, continued coordination with tribal partners, the ongoing legal battles. But tonight, under stars that had witnessed centuries of human struggle and resilience, she could appreciate how far they had already come. The widow who had reluctantly signed inheritance papers for a failing farm had discovered something far more valuable than land or buildings. She had found a purpose that connected her to both past and future, a community of allies who shared her vision, and the strength within herself to stand against seemingly insurmountable odds. As Rebecca walked back toward the farmhouse, she felt James's presence not as a ghost haunting these acres, but as a part of the land itself, integrated into the story of this place as surely as the ancient peoples who had first recognized its sacred nature. His love for this farm had never been about crop yields or profit margins. It had been about connection to something enduring. Now that connection would continue through the Heritage Center, through the Sustainable Agriculture Program, through the protection of the sacred site. Most importantly, it would continue through the people who would come here to learn, to remember, and to imagine new possibilities for relating to the land and to each other. The lights of the farmhouse glowed welcomingly as Rebecca approached. No longer a symbol of failure and loss, it had become a beacon of hope, not just for her, but for an entire community rediscovering its relationship with history and with the land itself. Tomorrow, Rebecca would begin drafting educational programs that would bring the site's significance to life for visitors. She would work with tribal elders to ensure that indigenous perspectives remained central to the Heritage Center's mission. She would continue cooperating with investigators building their case against those who had treated the land and its people as expendable resources. But tonight, she would simply be present with the knowledge that sometimes the most valuable inheritances are not those we expect. Sometimes they arrive disguised as burdens, as problems to be solved, as painful reminders of what we've lost. It is only when we engage with them fully, with courage, with openness, with persistence, that they reveal their true nature as gifts that can transform not just our own lives, but the world around us. Inside the farmhouse that had once represented James's failed dream, Rebecca looked at the simple stone with its star-like marking. She placed it on the windowsill where it caught the last light of day, a small but perfect symbol of all that had been saved, all that had been discovered, and all that remained to be created on this land where history and future were being rewoven into a single unbroken thread. The ancient oak stood sentinel outside, its sprawling branches embracing the sacred ground as it had for 5 centuries, bearing witness to the enduring power of those who recognize what is truly worth protecting in this world. And beneath its sheltering limbs, the spirits of those who had come before, from the original Pawnee spiritual leaders to James Harlow himself, continued their eternal dance with the stars, their legacy now secured for generations yet unborn. In finding her place within this continuing story, Rebecca had discovered the most profound truth of all. Some inheritances are not measured in acres or dollars, but in purpose, in connection, and in the courage to stand for something that will outlast our brief moment on this earth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.